Let's get going. I don't know why the scheduled time was 2:20 p.m., but it was supposed to be 2:30 p.m. So we'll hang out for about 5 minutes or so. But one thing I could use your help on is let me know how my audio is, not necessarily on Instagram, but on YouTube or LinkedIn, Facebook. How is the audio today? Yesterday, I was doing my weekly live update, and my audio just was kind of not there. And I think I know why, and I hopefully fix that. But if you're watching your live now, let me know how that audio is. Now, audio is better today. Good to hear. Wonderful. Thank you. All right. So today we are going to go into our real estate market update, looking back at August data, really some of the national data from July, and also I watched a video yesterday, maybe it was a couple of days ago, by Stephen Graham, and he's kind of a finance guru on YouTube. He's a real estate investor himself, like myself, and had made an interesting comment like, now maybe isn't the time to be buying a house, and maybe you should be renting versus buying. And some of the analytics he went into and analysis was like, you should only buy if you're going to be in the house for 28 years. And now, he didn't come out and explicitly say that. He plugged it into a calculator and also kind of just high level said, unless you're going to be there for a long time. Now, I plugged in information based off of what his parameters were, looking at Fort Collins rent versus buy. And I'm going to dive into that here today. And I'm going to look at different variables. And so if you're watching, feel free to ask me to, plug in some different variables, and we'll have fun with it a little bit. But this is where we go through high level data, median sales price, new listings, closed sales, months of supply, days on market, see if there's any kind of, canaries in the coal mine, so to speak. But right now it's been an interesting month because, the Fed came out and said, basically after their Jackson Hole meeting, they said, hey, we're probably going to be cutting rates. And the market didn't do as much as I thought it probably would have as far as the 10-year treasury, which the 30-year fixed mortgage follows roughly the 10-year treasury. But overall, interest rates have come down. I'll show you what those are. We're getting some retail lenders around 6.5 to 6.6%, and mortgage brokers between 6 and 2.25%. Depending on points and paying. There's so many different ways interest rates can be played with. But I'm going to share my screen, so let's get rocking and rolling. We're right at that 2:30 time period. So if you are joining at the 2:30 market live, here we go. This is going to be about Fort Collins National. And then we're going to play with some different buy versus rent analysis, and then look at what interest rates might do. Okay, let's put me here. So this is Fort Collins median sales price for residential detached houses. Excuse me, this is not sales price. That was new listings. Sales price, there we go. Sales price kicked up huge in August, which was kind of disturbing that it dropped so low in July, because usually, in July time period, we actually see a peaking of prices in June and July, but not such a huge steep decline. So that was a little bit concerning on last month's market update, but then kicked right back up to $680,000. I'm going to show this here in a little bit. On a rolling 12-month, though, we're at 0% as far as appreciation. And really, since November of 2022, we're up $10,000. So, I think that's 0.15%. So very minimally up on over the last 3 years, which is actually been really good for the market. It's kind of plateaued, allowed incomes to increase, affordability to really take an opportunity to be a little bit better. So let's go here. We'll go back to monthly. If you're watching on Instagram, feel free to jump on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn. There is a lot of lots of visuals today. New listings is interesting. New listings are coming down. They're down 4% this year versus last year. And one thing that I've noticed, and even myself, I put a property on the market to sell for a 1031 exchange, and I didn't get necessarily the activity that I was hoping for. I didn't need to sell it. I did one reduction, still didn't necessarily get the activity that I was hoping for. And I looked at the numbers and analysis, and I don't have to do the 1031 exchange. and it's a great asset. So I'm unless it goes under contract today, which there is a buyer that's interested. So who knows, maybe it ultimately comes through. But if it doesn't, I'm going to pull it off the market, rent, and it's a great asset for me as far as a rental goes. I've had another listing that didn't sell, ended up, we're going to turn it into a rental for at least 9 months, maybe, a couple of years, 21 months to get us to May of 2027 and get it on the market at that time, relist it in the spring, kind of get that spring buyer. But in the meantime, the rental rates that he's getting are great, covers his mortgage and then some. So I'm not surprised as far as seeing this number dip a little bit from a seller's perspective. They're not necessarily like, we've had 2 different golden handcuffs over the last 3 years. One being the interest rates. Like, I'm not selling because I have a 3% mortgage and I don't want to go get a 7% or 8% mortgage. And now they're saying, well, if I can't necessarily get the price that I need or want, I'm going to sit, hold it, or maybe turn it into a rental. So I could see, this inventory number not peaking or skyrocketing like it could, because some of these sellers don't have to sell. Closed sales, though, are up 14%, shows demand is strong. With interest rates, a lot of people are taking into consideration, let's see here, actually, any way you can take into consideration days listed. Yes, days listed. Are you talking about total days on, I'll help you, days on market. I'll look at that here shortly, which can calculate days listed, so to speak. But regardless, demand is up. Under contract numbers, those are up as well. So our demand is up. Our inventory, as far as new listings, are a little bit down, but our number of homes on market is up 8.8%. So homes are sitting a little bit longer, but our month supply is still only around 2.9 months, but I think for both it's like 3.5. Yeah, 3.3 for both. So still very favorable to sellers in that regard, but there's not a lot of buyers that are out that are knocking down doors. It's just, we're not getting a ton of new inventory. New builders are building slowly. We'll look at the housing shortage that we have and how many homes are being built, how many permit starts and completions are getting done. So I'm going to stop the share for just a second because we're kind of high. Oh yeah, I forgot days on market. Days on Zillow is interesting. Days on Zillow is really interesting. That number, Miss Peters, only because when I go put a listing on the market, I have it coming soon, and I put it on Monday. Zillow starts counting those days on market from the coming soon, whereas the MLS data doesn't start counting days on market until it goes live. So there is a little discrepancy, probably in the matter of 3 to 5 days is all. So nothing too crazy, but days on market in Fort Collins detached, we're up to 45 days on market, which is actually, pretty decent, meaning a house is going to sit on the market for 14, 15 days prior to going under contract. And we kind of reverse engineer that a little bit because the typical contract time period is about 30 days. So you take 30 days away from that, from 45, you get 15. So about 14 to 15 days on market before going under contract and then subsequently closing. So you do have some time. Buyers are really, we talked about it before, but this buyer journey, Connor had a property that could put under contract, and from the day the buyer toured it till the day that the buyer offered, it was 8 days in between. So that buyer toured the home, toured other homes, came back, made an offer on that house, made an aggressive offer. They took it. So that buyer journey is a little bit different. So homes are having to sit on the market a little bit. So as a seller, we'll talk about this here shortly, but one of my biggest pieces of advice is going to be to be patient. Okay. All right. Now we're there. I want to just it's hopefully going to be a good show today. The next thing I want to show you is the national scene versus Fort Collins. So on the national side in July, our single family homes were up. The median sales price was up 0.3% from last year. And then our condos were actually down 1.2%, which Fort Collins is tracking very similarly. Fort Collins is up 0% as we just showed on a rolling 12 months, and down 1.1% on the condo market. So it's tracking very similarly to the national market in regards to how pricing is acting right now. Closed sales. This is kind of what's interesting, right? So in the 2021, 2022, interest rates were, high 2s, low 3s. Demand, this shows what peak demand. I would have to imagine this is peak demand, 6.5 million homes sold on an annual basis. And we're all the way down to 4 million homes on an annual basis right now. So demand is, what's 2 out of 3? That's 33% lower than it was in 2021. But that doesn't mean that those buyers, and then one of the things that I think is really important to understand, those buyers aren't away, or those sellers who would be buyers aren't like fully not paying attention. They're just on the sidelines right now. And one thing as a buyer that I'm advising, and I think strongly, is right now you have a lot of negotiation power. I think it's worth taking your shots and, trying to get lucky on a good deal. And we'll talk about that here shortly. But Fort Collins tracks that very similarly. Our demand peaked late 2021, early 2022, and is actually gaining steam a little bit, but definitely much lower now than it was in 2021, 2022. Inventory. Inventory is a little bit higher nationally, 4.6 months of supply in the nation. And affordability is really the biggest thing. It's the biggest pressure that's pushing buyers to stay in rentals longer. And here's the inventory in Fort Collins, 3.3 months. And this is residential and residential detached and attached dwelling. So 3.3 months. So about a month lower than the market in general. So inventory is still pretty restricted in Fort Collins. Here is the Realtors Confidence, National Association Realtors Confidence Index. Okay. You can see that because I'm going to talk about that here in a second. I think this is I'm really excited to talk about this today. So I'm going to get jumping in that here shortly about Grant Steffen's video on buy versus rent and different variables I played with. But this is kind of a lower number than we'd like it to be. First-time home buyers are only making up 28% of the market right now. Sales to investors, second-time homeowners, boomers are the majority of the buyers in the market right now. They're ones that have home equity, can parlay it into the next deal, are investors, so either have like a different lens when they're looking at homes, and then cash sales, 31% versus last year at only 27%. So, there are opportunistic buyers out there. It's just quite difficult if you're a first-time home buyer to be in the market and be able to compete and come up with the down payment. That's one of the things that I'm going to show here shortly about my own versus rent break even. Distressed sales, still kind of a nothing burger, but I guess we're up 100%, 2% of the homes versus 1% of the homes in 2024. And then days on market, we're up to 28 versus 24 days this year versus last year. Okay, so here's what I was talking about a little bit earlier. Don't pay attention to this for right now. I'll show you that here in a second. All right, so Grant Steffen is a very big real estate investor. I don't think he's an active real estate agent anymore, but big proponent of buying your house, investing in real estate. He came out with a video recently that said, maybe it's not the right time to buy a house, your first house, unless you're going to be in the house for like 15, 20, 27 years. And he had a calculation of essentially what the cost of renting is versus the actual cost of home ownership. And these are this is what he had for his cost. So he had buying a house with 20% down, 1% annual cost of home repairs, 5% opportunity cost. So like you could take your down payment and go invest it in the market and get a 5% return. In Fort Collins, Fort Collins specifically, 4.4% of the purchase value of the value of the home and homeowners insurance, and then 0.6% of the property value and property taxes. Those are your annual costs to own a home, both real and hidden in regards to the opportunity costs. So I came in here, and tell me if you can see this. I'll zoom in a little bit more. Hopefully, okay, so hopefully you can see this. Let me know if you cannot. But essentially what this is buying a house at a $685,000 house, which is the median sales price in Fort Collins of a 4-bed, 3-bath detached home. And I compared that against a 4-bed, 3-bath home in Fort Collins that's up for rent right now that's asking $2,900 a month. Now, there are some properties that are asking $3,500 to $4,500 for a 4-bed, 3-bath, and there are some that are asking $2,500 to $2,750 per month. So roughly averaging out to about $2,900 for a 4-bed, 3-bath, which is what I compared here. So that is your annual cost to rent a home compared to your annual cost of buying home. So this is only interest, 1% cost of repairs, 5% on your down payment compounded annually of your return, homeowner's insurance, property tax, your total annual cost of owning a house. Okay. Now, there's a couple of things that are important to know about real estate, or I would say it's worth considering. And these are the variables that we can play with. So if you guys have any variable that you want me to play with on here, I'm happy to do that. But this is a $685,000 house with 20% down. And this is your annual principal pay down beginning in year 1. So this would be your loan value after 12 months of payments, and then your equity. And this would be the benefit of owning a house. So part of a benefit of owning a house is, yes, part of your mortgage payment is going to principal pay down, which is like a forced savings account. So your benefit in year 1 is $6,300. Okay. And then it costs money to sell a house. I assume 7%. I think you could probably negotiate both. Regardless, I considered 7% cost of sale, which is what your net would be after your sale in comparison to your $137,000 down. So if you sold in year 1 and you owned, you'd essentially lose $61,000. Okay. So if you bought a house, had to sell your house after 1 year, the net value of owning that house in year 1 is a minus $61,000. Okay. But you can see pretty quickly. Now, this is assuming down here, you can see a 3. Now, this is after year 1. We're assuming a 0% growth in year 1. You bought your house at $685 on January 1st, and December 31st, your house is still valued at $685. So I try to be relatively conservative. And this is going to be my most aggressive analysis on home value appreciation at 3%. So beginning here each year, and this is the most powerful thing about owning property, is you can own a $700,000 asset for $140,000, but benefit from the appreciation on the totality of the asset. So you're not appreciating $140,000, you're appreciating on $700,000, which is, the power of debt and things of that nature. So after year 2, your home value, starts to inch up a little bit. And after 13 years, this is year 13, if your values were increasing at 3% annually, you'd have a home value of $976, a ending loan balance of $423, for equity of $552,000. Since I'm going to do this real quick, view, freeze, there we go. So your benefit of owning a home on this situation, this takes out your $137,000. So essentially, this is the benefit of owning a home for 13 years, and the difference between renting and owning after the sale of the property. So if you're at a 3% growth annual, you have to hold it at least 4 years, but really it starts to skyrocket after that point. Now, a few things that we are doing, we are compounding the return. We are having annual cost of repairs increase at 3%. So we did try to have as many variables at play here as possible. Renting, we increased at 4%. Now we could increase that at 5% or at 3%. Those are pretty small numbers in comparison to the general deal of it. I will say with our rentals, we actually just did an analysis and we had 3.5% annual appreciation this year, September 25 versus 2024. So I think that's pretty fair. Now, if you own it for only, and you're assuming only a 2% annual appreciation after year one, you need to hold it still 3 years, but probably at least through 4 years, if not 5. And then if you want to have a more modest, one thing to understand, we had some crazy years in 2020, 2021, early 2022 as appreciation goes. But late in 2022, as I showed earlier, we've had flat growth. It's essentially 0% growth and for 3 total years, which has been nice to be able to kind of get back to a more normalized average. Since the 70s in Fort Collins, we've had 5.5% annual appreciation. So assuming a 2% annual appreciation or a 1% annual appreciation, I really think is pretty fair. Okay. So this is only a 1% annual appreciation, saying that you need to hold it at least 5 years. And it's not until year 6 that the difference in renting versus selling. And this is just so you guys know, this is after the sale of the property, including a 7% cost to sell. So I try to make this as real as possible. Okay. Now, what if you bought today and the market went down 5% after the first year? Like it just, and for perspective, in 2008 and 9, it was either 7 and 8 or 8 and 9 in Fort Collins, our market went down 0.5% and 2% on a median sales price. So that's the great housing recession. And so going down 5%, it could go, and I think, but just so you guys know, I think it's like Miami, Phoenix, Las Vegas, they went down like 30%. So it's not to say that you can only go down 5%. I'm just trying to say, hey, listen, what if it goes down 5% and then goes up from there annually 3%? Well, you would be out until basically year 6 or 7, that it starts to make sense to own a house. And then finally, I looked at that same thing, down 5% after the first year and then up only 2%. It pushes you out to year 6 and 7 that it makes sense buying a house. So my takeaway from this, and I don't see anybody asking any specific questions or any scenarios they would like to see. If you'd like to see a certain scenario, I'm happy to do that. So I can come back to it though. But it kind of gets back to, if you're going to move to an area or move into a new house and you can only be there for a year or 2, maybe 3 even, rent the house, rent the house. And if you're going to be there for 5, 6, 7 years, owning a house just makes a lot of sense. So I thought that was interesting looking at Fort Collins specifically. Now, the first question that I could hear somebody asking is, okay, but I don't have $137,000 down to put on a house. And that is a big challenge. And that's where, unfortunately, right now, like the median first-time homebuyer age per the National Association of Realtors is like 38 or 39 years old. That means you are having to either come up with a down payment. Hopefully in those years, you're making a lot more money income-wise, so you can save, and hopefully you're, being very particular about that. But I can tell you, if you're able to start earlier by way of a condo, a townhome, a house hack, anything along those lines, that's the power of compounding on the real estate side of things. So, like my sister's a great example. She bought a condo townhome as her first house. She lived there for 4 or 5 years. She was able to sell that. She had an additional $60,000 of equity. Now, this was when homes were only $400,000, $500,000, new homes. And she was able to take her equity that she put into the condo, plus the down that she took into the condo, plus the newly acquired equity and appreciation, and parlay that into the new house. So that's kind of the importance of starting earlier. But if you're in the market today and you're like, man, I just don't want to go through that 5% decline, and I don't argue with that. Well, the most bearish person in the entire real estate influencer world is, I think it's Nick Gurley, I believe it is, of Reventure. I've pulled up his data before. I really enjoy what he kind of talks about, but why not make offers based off of what he's projecting Fort Collins over the next year to do? So I'm going to add this back to the stage. And specifically, here we go. So in Fort Collins, 80528 is expected to go down 4.7%. So if you're buying a house and it's listed for something, it's been on the market for a bit, maybe they've done a couple reductions or anything along those lines, and you like that house, well, make an offer with the notion of, I'm not buying this house for more than 4.7% off of the list price. So you can build in a little bit of that cushion. I just think that's kind of an interest. Now, again, I'm not saying what Nick earlier, Reventure Capital is correct. I'm just saying this is a strategy if you're concerned about the market at all, having any types of reduction. This is something that, the biggest bear on the market from my perspective is suggesting. 80526 though, down 9.1%. Let's see here. 80524 only down 3.5%. 805. Yeah. Where's 80521? 80521 down 3.9%. So if you're an 80525, you're at 9.1%. 80525, 9.1%. 80526, 4.9%. That's just an idea. Throwing that out there. He is the biggest bear on the market. So if you're concerned about that, which I'm not necessarily by any means, that's a strategy going into it. So a question would be like, why can't prices come down? And it's not that they can't, but what is the case is in 2007 and 2008, we had, and you can actually see it right here, 2007, 2008, we had an oversupply of houses kind of moving into that, out of the Great Recession, and home builders got hurt, and they have basically slammed the brakes on new construction, and they are not keeping up with the new builds. So there is, according to different sites, anywhere from 3.8 million to 4.7 million homes, a housing shortage, meaning we have demand that is there that are either having to rent, stay in other houses, older houses, dilapidated houses. But there is a demand of between 3.8 to 4.7 million as far as a shortage goes. And this is realtor.com. This is showing a housing gap excluding pent-up demand of only 2.2 million. So this is like new formation of households. And this is housing gap including pent-up demand of 3.8 million. So there is substantial demand, and new construction isn't necessarily filling the gap. In fact, it would take 7.5 years at our current building rates to close the gap. And you're like, okay, well, why don't builders push the pedal to the metal? Well, here's some data for you on builders, okay? Building permits, 1.35 million. Housing formations is about a million. So we are building more than housing formations. It's just still not enough. Starts, housing completions. So we're down 2.8% from June and 5.7% lower on building permits versus 2024. Housing starts, we are up 5.2% from June and 12.9% from July. So it seemed like probably the permits that were pulled in January or late last year, excited about this year, those builders are still moving forward with it, but permits are slowing down. People are saying, hey, let's pause a little bit. I'll get right to that, Mrs. Peters. Let's pause a little bit and see what happens in this market. And then housing completions were up 6% from June, but 13.5% below since 2024. a quick question was, the data you showed on home prices earlier on appeared to show lower prices in the winter. Did I interpret that correctly? Absolutely. It's cyclical. I'll show my screen real quick. Let's do max monthly. So we generally do see a dip in, where we go, prices, sales price. So we generally see a dip in housing prices in the winter months, October, November, December. So, each dip you can kind of go and assume that you're in the winter months. So yes, there is a little bit of a dip in prices as we move into the winter. That's pretty typical. The sellers who are selling are extremely motivated, and there's some opportunistic buyers out there. So you're spot on. That is what you saw. All right, moving right along. All right. Oh, and then how does Fort Collins compare to the nation as far as building permits go? Well, in July, we were way down, but annually, we're extremely high. We're up 55% on our building permits this year versus last year, year to date. So a similar feel that we're up annually, but July is down quite a bit. So people are kind of like, hey, let's just, push the brakes, pause a little bit, see what's going on. We don't want to overbuild. So that's Fort Collins for you. Moving right along. A couple of pieces of note. So Jerome Powell at his, Black Jackson Hole basically made some comments that suggested it's time. Time is here. We are going to start making cuts. What does that mean for interest rates? Time will tell. So we will see what happens. Berkshire Hathaway's Warren Buffett invested $1 billion in home builders and steel companies between D.R. Horton's, Lennar Homes, and a couple others. Now, that's not a huge amount of his cash position, but it's still significant. $1 billion into those three builders. So the Oracle of Omaha saying new housing, new construction, real estate is doing well. Kevin O'Leary goes, mortgage rates need to drop to 5.5% for buyers to return. I'll agree with that. I'm going to scroll up here real quick to show you this closed sales sheet. Right here, this dip, the lowest part of the demand. Hopefully you can, oh, geez, here we go. Right here, this dip, this lowest part of our closed sales in Fort Collins on a rolling 12-month average was right around October of 2023 when interest rates were about 8%. So it is absolutely, demand is following affordability, and affordability is being paced by interest rates. Okay, we're coming to an end here. Mortgage applications, though, are up. Now, this was as of August 27th. Mortgage applications or refinances are up 19% versus 1 year ago. And new purchase applications are up 25% versus 1 year ago. So those people are getting off of the sidelines. They're getting off of, saying, hey, we're ready. It's time to go. Question, I might have missed it. Was there any mention of what we think interest rates might be dropping to? I'm not sure. I think a healthy interest, I actually was caught off guard when I was talking to a group of guys, including a lender. And I said, I just hope that interest rates hover right around, but I think a healthy interest rate is between 5 and 5.5%, nothing less than 5. And I think 5.5 is kind of like the honey hole, but between 5 and 5.5 is like a very healthy market. And then I said, I don't think we're ever going to see interest rates below 4. And two of them were like, well, I don't know, maybe not anytime soon, but we're definitely going to see them again. I was like, man, that's pretty wild to me. I will say in 2013, I bought a house that had a 3.25% mortgage. And I said the exact same thing at that time. I said, I'll never see interest rates this low. I'm going to hold on to this interest rate till I die. And then 2020 and 2021 came with 2.5 to 2.75% interest rates. So not sure on where they're necessarily going, but it does seem like they're going lower. This was from a mortgage broker suggesting for a first-time home buyer specific criteria, but here's interest rates that they're offering with discount points, and this was as of August 29th. Okay. Ending this off with kind of a rundown of just kind of a summary of everything for you guys. Now, if you guys have any questions, now's the time to ask. I'm happy to answer them, but I'll go through kind of the summary. So Fort Collins is following closely with national trends, both on inventory, closed sales, and median prices. The condominium market is definitely a little softer in Fort Collins and the nation comparatively to others. New construction is just pretty anemic across the nation and including, Fort Collins, although we are up pretty significantly against last year. We talked about home ownership versus renting. I believe the minimum time you need to have on your horizon if you're buying a house is 5 years. Anything less than that, you really need to start looking at it of, okay, well, what is our plan and what are we doing? But anything more than 5 years, if you have modest home appreciation and, you'll have, it just makes more sense to buy a house. Less than 5 years, renting is probably the way to go. Interest rates right now are between 6% to 6.5%, right around 6.25% is something that I think you should expect. Maybe they're going to trend lower. Maybe they're going to be lower. If anything, if you buy a house right now and interest rates go lower, you benefit from a less expensive mortgage by way of refinancing. Mortgage applications are stronger than last year, suggesting buyer demand. They're getting off the bench. They're getting ready to go, which is definitely part of my recommendation. And then finally, if you're concerned about the market, if you're bearish on the market, look at some of those 12-month forecasts from the ReVenture, app. If you have any questions on that specifically, ask me about a specific area, and I can tell you, well, they're suggesting that the prices are going to go down 3.9%. Okay. So what are my recommendations to buyers and sellers? As a buyer, be ready, be aggressive. I think you should start touring houses, writing offers, and, being relatively aggressive in our current market. I will tell you, as somebody who just put on a property myself on the market just 2 weeks ago, I'm open to looking at every offer. Now, that's definitely not to say that I'm taking it by any means, but as a homeowner, I have no problem with that. The worst thing that could happen is you just ask again in a couple of weeks, maybe at a different price, or maybe even at the same price. We've had buyers who we've offered, our team, I should say, has offered an aggressive ask and then came back like 3 weeks later and had the exact same offer and the seller took it. Let's see here. Plan for 5+ years. I think that's the biggest thing. Your plan should be 5 years if you're buying. I would say start early as a buyer. Even if right now you're looking at a townhome or condo, get in the game. A 19-year-old client who's now probably 25, maybe 24, 25, had the greatest comments in my real estate career. He said, "I just need to get a piece on the board." I couldn't agree more with that. I believe that's a great phrase because if you can't win the game if you're not playing. And it's not about winning in the game. It's about staying in the game. And for sellers, be patient. I watched a lot of houses wait for that buyer to come through. And actually, there was houses that I've seen that have been on the market that I'm like, no way are they going to get that price. And they did a couple price reductions of like 2%, 2.5%, got the price. As a seller, price realistically and prepare well. When I was putting my property on the market to sell, new carpet, new paint, a deep clean, handyman in there to touch things up and prep it to sell. So I think that's one of the most important things you could do. Let's see here. A couple of comments real quick. Let me finish my last thing real fast and then I'll get to the comments. As a seller, expect negotiation, both on the price and on inspections. I think if you go into it with the realistic expectations, you're not going to kill the deal because of emotions. You're going to go in there with the right expectations, and on the backside, be happy because you're like, you know what? I priced my house to sell. I knew they were going to come in and ask for things on the inspection because, well, hey, it's part of negotiations. And I walked away with roughly the amount that I was hoping for. So I think having realistic expectations as a seller is important. So patience, price, and prepare. Expect negotiations as a seller. Now, jumping into some comments. All right, here we go. If we locked into a low COVID rate, how much percent would be tolerable, assuming they will never drop to that level again? I would have to imagine you're asking what percent would be tolerable, assuming they will never drop to that level again. Man, I think it's just a matter of what your monthly mortgage is, and it needs to reflect a certain percentage of your either gross pay or take-home pay, however you're wanting to look at it. And if that all makes sense between creative financing ways of buying down points, I would say the interest rate is expected to come down at some point. I think the lowest it should come down is to 5 to 5.5% for a very healthy, normalized, healthy growth market. That's just me saying. But if it goes to 3%, 4%, imagine a nozzle of buyers, a faucet of buyers coming on to the market. I bought my house at 23, and it was one of the best financial decisions I ever made. I think I was right there with you. I think I was at 22 or 23 years old, and this is now my third house, and each house was a building block to my next house. And I agree with you. It's some of us, I had some assistance from my dad in regards to guaranteeing a loan and different strategies. So I know a lot of people aren't necessarily in that position, but man, if you can get in there at the earlier, the better. And even as uncomfortable as it would be, like I mean, shoot, we house hacked, we flipped, we did creative ways to kind of build some sweat equity and some equity in homes to be able to do this kind of laddering up. And probably not anymore, but up until probably 3 or 4 years ago, I mean, I still would have house hacked. I mean, I have a huge basement, and if I could rent this thing out for a couple $1,000 and have my mortgage be almost nothing, I probably would do that. So there are creative ways to get into real estate, but it's just about getting in and getting started. Definitely no way I could have moved to Fort Collins if it wasn't for my house appreciating. Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's, again, I think the most powerful visual or powerful kind of framing is you can get into a house with 3%. I mean, like 3.5%. Okay. Not to say that's not what I'm recommending, but I'm saying you could get into a house for 3.5%. So a $700,000 house, roughly about $24,000, $25,000. But you are controlling a $700,000 asset that's benefiting from the market's appreciation. So if the market's appreciating by 5%, your $25,000 after year one becomes $60,000 of equity, $35,000 of appreciation, $25,000 down payment. So, I mean, it's just an extremely powerful tool. I don't see any further questions. I'm excited. Tonight I am doing a buyer webinar and seller webinar. I don't know if there's still time to sign up for that, but buyer webinar, I believe, is at 7 p.m. and seller webinar is at 6 p.m. tonight. We've got quite a few people coming, which I'm super excited about. Feel free to ask any questions, send me an email. And if you're considering relocating, Logan, I appreciate you so much for reaching out to Super Real Estate Services. I hope that you're happy with your decision. But if you're considering, relocating to Northern Colorado, buying, selling, or investing in the area, give my team and I a call. We are extremely close. We do a lot of deals and are extremely in touch with the market and very well connected. So we'd love to be an asset on your team, buying, selling, or investing here in Northern Colorado. So appreciate you guys watching. And Caleb has been great. Caleb's the man. He is, talk about somebody who started investing early. I mean, dude is super successful for being as young as he is. So very knowledgeable, lives, eats, breathes real estate. So thank you, Miss Peters, for watching. Love that you watch all the videos. Appreciate you. That definitely makes my day, because every now and again I get a troll comment that, makes me think about things twice. Like, oh, dang, I'm a goofball or whatever. All right, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care. We will see you soon.